Let's go! Yeah!
This is me, and this is my awesome father. And we are 3 days deep into a 10-day Canadian fishing trip in the Quetico Provincial Park. But we need to start from the beginning, which is here, at the put-in, where we got a boat tow all the way to the Canadian border to check into customs. After crossing the border between our homeland of America and the foreign land of Canada, we quickly set out, which marked day 1 of our 10-day trip. Footage doesn't technically begin until day 2, so we're going to breeze through day 1 real quick. For our first day of the trip, we left customs at around 9 to 10 a.m. We traveled roughly 13 miles until our first campsite, which took around 9 to 10 hours of steady paddling and portaging. For those of you who aren't aware, a portage, or portage as some say, is when you carry your boat and cargo from one body of water to another, which isn't as easy as it sounds. To reach our first campsite, we had to make 3 portages total. There's a bit more to know about portages, but I'll explain that later. Eventually, we got to a campsite on our first major stop, Lake Agnes, a large body of water where winds can become so powerful and waves so high, you could be stuck at camp for days. So, what was our business being on such a terrifying body of water? Well, trout, of course. Not just any trout, though. Lake trout. In fact, if I got one, this would be my first lake trout I've caught, so I was excited about catching one. We got to our camp at about 6 p.m. Exhausted after a long day, we unloaded the canoe, set everything up, and caught a couple of fish for a nice fish dinner. In fact, we plan on having a delicious fish dinner almost every night of this trip. And because we were super tired, we immediately went to bed after finishing our dinner. Our recording starts on day 2. We had figured we wouldn't need to take the GoPro out on the first day, but hindsight is 2020, so I probably should have. It didn't help that I was new to this live filming thing, so I wasn't sure how much footage I would need in the end. And with that in mind, I'll have to ask you to excuse the sometimes shaky, sometimes shoddy camera work by me, as this whole trip was recorded using a GoPro. That was almost always attached to my head. Anyways, day 2 was a rest day. We could relax and recover after our long journey from yesterday. We also wanted to stay a couple days on Agnes, as it was a prime lake for those pesky lake trout. We started the day paddling around the first main area of Agnes as we trolled for trout. No, not the internet kind of troll, but the kind where you drag your lure behind your hand-powered water car. Some of you are probably wondering if this is my first time touching grass. And no, this is not my first time being outside. As surprising as it may seem, I have in fact been going yearly on long trips like these with my father since I was around the age of 12. So I am very comfortable in this type of environment.
Hey Dad, check out this sick plant I found.
Yeah, it's sick, alright. Poison ivy, man.
Oh, I knew that.
After trying for an hour or two, we now had a net profit of a whopping 0 trout. Maybe we could try again later. For now, we changed up the game plan. We switched our rods out and tried for some other fish instead. After finding a good spot, we indeed caught fish. We caught a lot of bass in the shallows, and this is just a fraction of what we caught overall. If I were to show you every fish, this video would be like 2 hours long. But by the end of the day, we had now caught enough fish for a nice fish dinner. These fish dinners are one of the main reasons my father and I are crazy about trips like these. If you've ever had an extremely fresh fish dinner, then you know just what I'm talking about. Day 3, we had decided to keep moving on to our second destination of the trip, Lake Kawanipi. But before we left, I had found something I wanted to take back home with me, a really cool rock. Now, I obviously didn't want to carry this rock myself, so I had to come up with an idea. I would hide it in my father's backpack. I managed to get it hidden at the bottom of the pack, and we set out soon after. I just had to pray he wouldn't notice. Anyways, we finished packing everything up, loaded the canoe up, and headed on our way.
Our next destination, Lake Trout.
We left really early, around 8 a.m., just to make sure we could make some progress in case it got windy. Luckily, the water was like glass, and we didn't have any troubles with the wind for a long time. We plan on making it all the way to the other side of Lake Agnes. We also figured we would try trolling again on the other side of the lake for a bit in search of that trout. We also tried finding some Native American pictographs that the map said were in the middle of the stretch.
There's another one right there, the orange one.
That More dry.
A couple dots could be islands.
Yeah, I think it's the continent. And then they fell off the edge.
That's where they get the flat earthers from.
That's it.
That big one must be the lake monster, the Lake Agnes lake monster.
Yeah, we didn't find them, so we kept moving. We put our lines in the water to start trolling, and soon enough, we had something.
I think they're faking it. I don't think there's actually a fish down there.
I don't think there is either. It's a goddamn log.
You think? Could be a stick. Oh,
See something?
yeah. Oh, baby.
Got the arm extended there.
Yeah. Let's go. Yeah.
Nice.
The first lake trout of the trip goes to my father. We were pretty hyped after this, so now it was my turn to catch one. After some more paddling and trolling, we made it out of the narrows in the middle of Lake Agnes. And not too long after, I eventually had something too.
Oh, very much fight. Very big fighter, let me tell you. Definitely does not feel like a stick that I'm reeling in.
You must have a lake trout.
If it feels just like a stick,
It's a
then
sluggish,
it's a lake trout.
it's a very sluggish, lethargic, half-dead fish. You have
That is probably a lake trout then.
You got him out.
Now he's wrapping around it.
Straight one, isn't it?
Come on, baby.
We had done it. Ladies and gentlemen, trout. Now that we had our dinner in tow, we decided while Agnes was manageable that we should put our rods away and try to make as much ground as possible. Some of you might have realized by now, but I unfortunately won't be sharing every detail of our camping trip. And what I mean by this is that I don't think it's necessary to talk about everything, like the camping equipment we used, the food we brought, all our supplies, the lures we used, every regulation we had to abide by, every time we went to the bathroom, etc., etc., etc. As much as I would love to inform everyone and share my love and knowledge of camping, the video would be 20 hours long. And you have to admit, who cares about how at 4:47 p.m. I pooped in the woods? I made sure to use Charmin Ultra Soft 4-ply toilet paper when I wiped in a counterclockwise motion to provide optimal... You know, like, who cares? It doesn't matter, okay? But I will be talking about things like portages and how long we traveled, just to get across to people that this wasn't a walk in the park like it might appear to be. And with that being said, the wind wasn't terrible for our paddle across Agnes, but it was still in our face. Either way, we made good ground, and after 6 hours of paddling and roughly 11 miles, we had made it to another campsite. We set up camp, and if I were to write a review on it for TripAdvisor, it would go something like this. The boat landing was trash. It's obvious that many people before us have snapped their backs and canoes in half attempting to traverse this landing. The campsite itself might as well have been placed directly on top of the San Francisco fault line. But it was kind of flat, so 4 out of 5 stars. The trout fish dinner was a big win for us both, and we then went to bed a little while later as we plan on doing another travel day tomorrow. For day 4, we woke up early again and headed out. Luckily, we weren't too far away from our next portage, and it didn't take long before we reached it. We were now at our 4th portage of the trip, and now is the point where I'll talk about these things a little bit more. So, as I said before, to complete a portage, you need to carry your gear from one body of water to another. These portages vary in length, but are always trimmed paths that are very noticeable. So it's quite hard to wander off them, unless maybe you're literally blind. Then that would be the only exception. But these trails aren't flat walking trails. Most of them are covered in rocks of various sizes. You had to be pretty careful with your footing, because one sprained ankle could spell disaster. So, that's why it's best to take it slow and be certain of your next steps. Like on a different portage, there was a point where you had to hop between these 2 rocks. This could be bad if you didn't pay attention to your feet, but because we were taking it slow, that means we could easily... Anyways, portages are measured in rods. Don't ask me why, I don't know. But what I do know is that one rod is roughly 16.5 feet. So, when you see a portage that says its length is 74 rods, you can assume it's roughly 1,221 feet. Man, this is exactly why Europeans bully us about our system of measurement. But I guess as a more reasonable measurement, it's basically a quarter of a mile. One way. Oh, you thought a portage was a single trip? No. You see, depending on how much gear you bring, you will have to go back and forth multiple times. This mostly depends on how many bags you bring and how much each person can carry per trip, so everyone's mileage varies. But because we had 5 bags in a canoe, that means we had to walk this portage 5 times. 3 trips with gear, and 2 return trips without any gear. Alright, you guys still with me? It's okay if you're not, but to understand how long a quarter of a mile takes to hike with 50 pounds of gear on your back, this entire clip you're watching is from one side of the portage to the other, and it took us 4 whole minutes to walk one way. That means to carry all of our gear from one side to the other, it would take us a minimum of 20 minutes. This portage reads that it was 74 rods long, but the distance wasn't the big problem. The problem was the bugs. They were thick. You couldn't take 2 steps into any part of the forest without being swarmed by mosquitoes and flies. Last night, actually every night on this trip, while laying down in the tent at night, you could hear the high-pitched whine of mosquitoes filling the entire woods. They were constant and they were everywhere. It was like you had tinnitus and you couldn't escape it. Kinda like real tinnitus. Huh. Millions of mosquitoes waited in the woods nearby, ready to turn any unprepared camper into a human juice box. On the portages, you would be chased by black clouds of insects. I am not exaggerating when I tell you there were millions of bugs. The only way we survived was because we wore long pants and shirts, along with a mosquito head net and pounds of bug spray. If you didn't have a windblown campsite, you would be eaten alive by mosquitoes. The wind was the only thing that kept them at bay. They were bad, okay? You get the picture? Anyways, we reached the end of the portage, making this 1 out of 5 trips. That means we had to do it 4 more times.
Yeah, what is in this bag, man? This thing is killing me.
I don't know, it probably like distributed the weight wrong or something when you repacked it.
So we gotta change something up because this is it's like there's freaking rats in here or something.
Now, hopefully, you all have a better understanding that a trip like this isn't exactly a simple walk in the park. We had 2 more portages to go, both roughly the same length. It was a quick paddle across each lake, and roughly 3 to 4 hours later, we arrived on our second destination, Kawanipi. We decided to head to a campground in this area of Kawanipi, and the wind was nice to us again, which landed us at our campsite a bit past midday. We had traveled for around 7 hours and were ready to set up camp by this point. We had made sure to choose a decently windblown campsite, and once settled down, we stayed at this campsite for the rest of day 4, then through all of day 5 and 6. We caught tons of fish, ranging from smallmouth bass, walleye, and northern pike. And I'll show you some of them now. But we were pretty far into the woods at this point. 3 days of traveling to be exact. And the best news was that we had a fish dinner every night so far. We decided that day 7 would be when we started heading back. This way, if the wind was head-on, we could make it back to the takeout in roughly the same amount of time it took to get here. We eventually set out early in the morning on day 7, and to our joy, the wind was to our back and helping us along. We made it through the 3 portages very quickly, and paddling across each lake was even quicker. When we made it back to Lake Agnes, it was midday. The nice breeze that helped push us along was now tenfold on Lake Agnes. As I said earlier, this lake can be dangerous. Because of how large it is, even a slight breeze can build up enough to cause decent waves across this lake. In fact, Many people choose to avoid Agnes in their travels just because of this. Just remember, ladies and gentlemen, tippy canoes don't get along very well with strong winds and high waves, and tipping is the last thing anyone wants to do, whether in a restaurant or out in the middle of a lake. So, we had to think carefully about our next course of action. We had some options. We could take a longer route around Agnes, where we would be sheltered from the wind and have minimal trouble, but in turn go through way more portages. And actually, there were multiple routes people already used for this, so we decided to... Oh yeah, we sent it across Lake Agnes. What started out as small waves quickly built up into whitecaps that we were riding over the farther we got away from the shore and the cover of the trees provided. What others would see as a danger to themselves and their gear, we saw the fastest travel time ever. Whitecaps were all around us, and we rode through the middle of the lake in style. But, as you might have guessed, it all worked out in the end. We didn't capsize in the lake, and we saved tons of time crossing Agnes. In fact, because of our ballsy decision, we had ended up covering 2 days of traveling in less than 6 hours. From our campsite at Kawanipi to this campsite on Agnes, we traveled almost 20 miles in 6 hours. That same distance took us over a total of 16 hours between 2 days of traveling when we came up, and the conditions were really good for that trip too. Don't get me wrong, what we did was a massive gamble, and I don't suggest anyone to try this. One wrong move, or if you get turned sideways, you will flip your canoe in that type of wind and waves. But as I've said, we aren't amateurs when it comes to stuff like this. In fact, we had never even left our comfort zone the whole paddle across. Anyways, when we set up camp, we had covered so much ground that we could remove a day of travel now. This gave us a nice rest day at a cool campsite, and for the rest of the day, we relaxed and ate some packaged food that night, where we then went to bed. Day 8 was now a rest day. We didn't really catch much until later at night, where we were ready to head back to camp and call it quits when we finally started getting some action.
Ooh. Ooh. Ooh.
Good one.
Ooh, good one.
In fact, we had come across a large school of minnows and a bunch of big walleyes and followed them in. We caught around 8 of these guys, but we only needed 1 big one and 1 small one to fill us up. The rest were catch and release. Here's one of them. The good news is that they were all around 24 inches long and the biggest of the trip so far, so we had a ton of fun with them. On day 9, we packed up and traveled some more. We planned on getting as close to our takeout as possible, and we had a good day's worth of travel in front of us. We stopped at Louisa Falls on our way out, and they were really pretty and a good highlight of the trip. And then we had to do the last 3 portages, one of which was 191 rods long, a little over half a mile one way.
25 minutes to a half an hour with gear on for this longest trail, which is ridiculous.
This single portage took us 2.5 hours to complete. Eventually, we made it through all of the portages, and we had decided to camp on Basswood Lake for the final night, as we had to be at our takeout for 9 a.m. By doing this, we made sure we had as little distance to cross in case we had to paddle head-on into the wind, and we would make sure we didn't miss our ride. When we got to a campsite, we had traveled for 9 hours that day, and were exhausted. We made some packaged food for supper, and went to bed. When we woke up on day 10, our destination was the customs at the border, where we would soon be on the road and heading back home again. We woke up early to make sure we had some wiggle room in case the wind was bad, and roughly an hour later, we were waiting on the shore with our canoe. Then, at 9 a.m., we were riding a boat out of there. This trip was crazy fun, and I can't wait to do another one next year. We had our fill of fishing and had brought back amazing memories that we will cherish for the rest of our lives. And me, I got my rock home. This video goes out to my dad, who I love so much. This video allows us to look back at these amazing memories and gives us a reason to be excited to keep doing these trips for years to come. Thank you all so much for watching, and love you, Dad.